Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. This is my regular series we do where we take a look at music. We look at the process of creating music. We look at, composing, arranging, improvising, playing by ear, all the different things that go into the creative act of making music. So, hope everyone's having a good day so far, and I got a couple different things we're going to be looking at today. One thing I'm going to tell you right off the bat is, I've been kind of teasing, or more than teasing, the idea of doing a cohort of the harmony course, and this is coming together. It's happening. It is happening, and more details will come out next week, but I'm going to give you the absolute heads up here. It is going to start, well, the course won't start next week. The course will start in 2 weeks. So September 4th, I think, is when we're going to get started. So you can kind of, mark that in your head. We're going to do it very much like we did the basic music theory course. I'll release some lessons every week or two. There'll be new lessons to work on. There'll be projects to go with it, and you're going to learn all about harmony and chord progressions, as the title of the course says. So I will talk more as we go on today about what that might entail. Next week we'll talk more about it, and then we'll get underway. But I also just want to be looking at some music today and talking about things. Harmony might come up, but other things will certainly come up. So I had asked people who were in the cohort space to post some links to some compositions or arrangements or whatever that you want to be talking about, and so I've got one here that Graham Archer posted, and it is his arrangement of Sunrise Sunset. Now, if I'm not mistaken, now he said this is an older arrangement that he's updated some, and I believe I looked at this arrangement a while ago, either that or it was another arrangement of another song from the same show, Fiddler on the Roof. Now I'm not remembering, but doesn't really matter. We're gonna listen to this, and you could talk about some things about the arrangement. Now, obviously, it is not his composition, but I'll talk a little bit about what goes into it musically. From a composition standpoint, as well as aspects of the arrangement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the playback of repeats, just because that always, simplifies things from the perspective of me being able to talk about things. And I'm just going to go ahead and play through the piece. It's, it's not terribly long, especially once the repeats are turned off. It's that long. So let's just listen to it and enjoy it, and then talk about some things. So here we go. All right. So nice job, Graham. And yeah, I see your comment about the sound not being good, and I'm doing the same things I usually am as far as that goes, but it certainly doesn't hurt for me to come over here and just fiddle with these settings again to optimize better as I play. So sorry, I know that might have been a little washy sounding. So let me actually just briefly just play a little bit of that again and see if we've made an improvement in the sound by me just toggling everything. But other than that, we're not going to worry about it, all right? Because technical issues are technical issues. All right, I'm not convinced that's any different, actually. Oh gosh, you're not seeing the score. All right, well, let's thank you. That is definite of my bad here. My bad here. My bad. That's right. We're going to hear the score again as we go through what we're doing here, so it'll be fine. So, did I do it? Am I getting it right? Here's the score. All right. So, we're going to take it in little sections here. By the way, Elliot, I see a question for you, but yeah, this isn't really the right place for that. But if you post in the discussion and support space your question, and but I can certainly tell you that deleting MuseScore and reinstalling it isn't going to affect any of your scores. MuseScore will never delete your scores, so that much is true. But whatever other problems, what I would suggest actually, Elliot, is help. Revert to factory settings. Under help, go to help, revert to factory settings, because probably your mixer just got moved off screen to another monitor and that you're not using anymore, and that's the problem right there, probably. Anyhow, so coming back to the music, so let's talk about a few things. Now, there are some MuseScore isms. Now, Graham, you mentioned that this was originally done in MuseScore 3, and upon updating to MuseScore 4, certain things are not as you expect. And some of these, I think, are, just due to some changes that have happened. Some of them are due to some techniques that I think you may have used here. Like, I'm going to guess this extra space at the beginning of this measure here. I'm not even going to guess. I don't know why that extra space is there. So the sound problems that you're hearing right now in the live stream are just internet connection issues, probably, because it sounds fine on my end here. But when I switch to my other computer, where the sound is having to go through the internet and come back down to the other computer, I hear that it doesn't sound as good. And so I think that's just, sometimes when you try to do audio online, the sound, depending on the strength of the connection, the sound comes through great, and sometimes it doesn't. So, but no, basically, from where I sit, the sound is really good right now. There's some things that we could change about some stuff. So one thing I'm wondering first from a notation perspective is how come, even though this measures 3/4 and I see 3 beats worth of stuff in here, where is all this extra space at the beginning of the measure coming from? So I'm a little curious about that. I don't want to get too deep into MuseScoreisms, but since I know that was one of the issues with this score, was bringing it from 3 to 4, let's take a look and see. Oh my gosh, look at that leading space. There's like this huge adjustment made in leading space that presumably you must have made in MuseScore 3, but I'm going to reset it. And now that's fixed. So that's the thing. In MuseScore 3, it was easy to accidentally make leading space adjustments if you tried to drag a note sideways and clicked on it. Funny, it would do that thing of adding extra space. MuseScore 4 makes it harder to make that kind of mistake. Oh no, it isn't. It's still just as easy. I can still drag a note sideways and it will still add leading space. So moral, don't do that. All right. It's the up and down thing that in MuseScore 4 now you can, if you drag a note up and down, it actually changes its pitch, and you can tell that because we see the ledger lines appearing. In MuseScore 3, dragging a note up and down, depending on time of day and phase of moon, would either change the pitch of the note or would just drag it funny. All right, so let's get back to the music here. So, all right, so Graham, if there's particular sound things other than just the kind of washiness of coming through the internet that's not sounding good to you, if there's things that sound good that aren't sounding good on your system either, let me know what measure, and we'll which section, particular notes, whatever, and we can try to check it out and see if there's something in particular going on. All right, so I love the effect of the clarinet here, and as you mentioned in the comment when you posted this thing, going for a klezmer sound, right? So the klezmer being, a term for a particular type of kind of a folk-ish music coming from this, Jewish tradition. And so it's totally an appropriate sound. And I agree with your assessment that it's probably too polite. But there's stuff about it that's really spot on. And so here I'm going to say, as far as the politeness of the clarinet part, that you put this same exact score in the hands of a real clarinet player, they will play it less politely. But let's address that right away. I'm going to solo just the clarinet, and let's talk about to what extent the writing itself in that clarinet part is more polite than we might want. I love that trill. So to me, this all feels good. This feels like good background kind of stuff, right? It's because it's not the melody, it's little answering phrases, right? That ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, those kinds of phrases are exactly what we want to fill gaps without taking away from anything. Now, if you wanted to ramp up the impoliteness of it, I would be looking to do more activity when the voices aren't moving. So for instance, I'm going to now, I'm going to play it from here with all the voices and talk about this. Let's hear all the voices. Right there, there's nothing really happening in the voices. I mean, they're singing a word, but it's a long word, right? So do-da-dum, ba-da-dum is not very active. And conceivably, you could have the clarinet player do more there, right? Because it's not going to get in the way. You don't want more during the, is this the little girl I can't? You don't want during that part the clarinet to be covering things up. But once we get to the carried, once we get to the long notes, the clarinet can go a little more wild there. Now, this is also, I'm going to mention, I guess I'll call it a pet peeve of mine about repeats. I don't like repeats. It's not that I don't like repeating material, but I want it to be different each time. And so here you're in a bit of a quandary in that it would be inappropriate for the clarinet to start right off going wild. That would be something you'd want to see happen the second time only. And that would require you not to write it out with repeats. You'd have to actually write the whole thing out so you could have a more involved clarinet part. For that matter, perhaps more involved piano part also. So that's something, I think I noticed that although I could be totally wrong, but I think I noticed that I mentioned earlier this week about the Mahler Symphony, and there's a break that happens around that time period of when Beethoven and earlier would write symphonies, and then they would have the exposition. They just put repeat signs around it, saying, okay, do this whole thing twice. But in Mahler's symphonies, that's not necessarily the case. In Mahler's symphonies, yes, there might be an exposition where the main themes do get repeated, but he will have written it out twice so that he can have different accompaniment, a more different things going on in his orchestration from the first statement of the theme to the second statement of the theme. And so that's a transition you start seeing around that time. The Romantic era symphonies saying, hey, let's expand this a little bit. Let's not just repeat things. Let's make them different. And so when we talk about klezmer, as a style, it's a style that involves at least some amounts of improvisation. And so it would be possibly expected the clarinet player would be improvising his part. And so he might play the simpler part that you wrote the first time, but then the second time, if you give him chord symbols, he or she might just improvise, a more complex part there. So that's certainly a possibility, is just to not bother writing anything else, but give this as the, the starting point, and then say second time improvise, and give chord symbols for it. So yeah, this boo-da-dum, boo-da-dum is a perfectly fine figure, but it's definitely the place where you could have done more, because that first figure, that's exactly the right thing to do behind the melody, or even less, but more during these places. So the same is true here, like once we get to this next end of the next phrase. So you already have ba-da-dum in the piano, that ba-da-dum, that descending line there, which is perfect. It's exactly what you want. And I don't know if that came from original sheet music, but it's right. That is absolutely like the right sound for that kind of thing. That bass line walking up from 1 to 4, and the chromatic descending line there is so idiomatic. It's so idiomatic, not just of klezmer, but of a lot of kinds of music. It's there's an aspect of it that comes from like ragtime, that comes from music hall types of vaudeville, and all sorts of different styles of music that use that chromatically descending line against an ascending bass line like that. So the clarinet here isn't really adding to the thing. Let me post a link to the score. Well, Graham, I'll let you post the link. It's in the cohort space, which is only for the people who were either gold members or part of the basic theory course. And when I do the harmony and chord progressions course, I'm going to shuffle around how this works a little bit. I'm going to shuffle around some things, so you can expect some changes to the organization of the spaces. But in any case, the clarinet isn't really adding to that, because we have the ba-da-dum, and the clarinet is also playing bum, right? Because that A is really a G. Bum, bum, and then the clarinet has the G here, which is really that F, and then just a D. In fact, I'm just going to turn on concert pitch so that we can be looking at those pitches. So ba-da-dum and ba-da-dum, these aren't sufficiently different to make that clarinet really stand out. I'm not sure you want to, because the piano part has the interesting thing, and maybe you just want the clarinet to play that exact line. But what if it was like something like that, right? No, not that. Something that's just, I don't know, actually the octave thing like that would be super cool if it was a saxophone, because then it's really easy. You just do it with the octave key. On clarinet, octave jumps like that are a little more of a pain in the butt. But that's the sort of thing that allows you to honor that line and also create a little more interest there. And yes, you're absolutely right, Graham, that this is for an amateur choir who might be sidetracked by too much background stuff. That's why we only do it in these gaps. And you know the choir, and if you think that any more is going to cause a problem, then by all means keep it more limited. But in general, you can usually rely on being able to do fancy stuff in the breaks. And you do fancy stuff in other breaks, right? I mean, this little break here is perfect. This guy here. I love that line, right? You've got that eighth notes happening in both the piano and the clarinet, and they're voiced in thirds. Nope. Well, mostly thirds, third, sixth, etc. Right? They're voiced in in harmonizing ways. It's basically arpeggiating this chord, and then the clarinet is arpeggiating kind of behind the piano. Now, speaking again of your word politeness here, let's take a look at what's actually happening here. The clarinet, in fact, if I just solo the clarinet and the piano here, what's happening here, if I play this note for note, I'm playing that note for note on the piano. I hear these thirds and sixths and all, and they're the same sound. They're both piano sound. But you have the piano voiced above the clarinet here, right? If that same exact figure were reversed, so the clarinet were above the piano, that would also be a thing. I'm not saying it's a better thing, but it would allow the clarinet to spend more time in the part of the range that really sings. I'm going to turn concert pitch off again and point out that the break happens right here. This G sharp, this G sharp, right, all those first few notes in the clarinet part are in the low range of the clarinet. That G sharp is like one of the most open notes you get. Not until you hit this C do we get into the upper part of the range of the clarinet. Not even the high range, but just the midpoint, above the midpoint of a clarinet's range. And so only those last three notes are in that range that really projects and sings. These notes, this is called the throat register, and it's a very breathy sound. I can't make a sound on this thing because it doesn't really work. Too many leaking pads. But yeah, so by putting the clarinet, giving these notes here to the clarinet, that high E flat would be a high F for clarinet, and it would actually sound kind of lovely. So I'm going to try this. All right, I'm going to try this. I'm going to select this passage here, copy, and I'll come down to the corresponding passage in the clarinet. And I'm going to use the swap with clipboard command. I'm going to say swap with clipboard, Control-Shift-X. That copies the piano part to the clarinet, and it copies the clarinet back to the clipboard, so I can come back over to the piano and now paste. And now the parts are flipped. And I want to hear what this sounds like. Right? So that high F is a high note. Yeah, I can make a sound on this thing. Reed's not wet, but I can make some sounds, but too many of the pads are leaking, and too many of the keys are a little funky for it to actually be playable. But it makes a sound. So anyhow, did you hear how that was a little different, right? Yeah, I mean that it brings that line out more that way. I'm not saying it's better, but if you're at all concerned with this politeness thing, that's something you could do that sort of turns up the intensity a notch. And then here's another thing as far as that whole question about repeating. What if it was the piano on top the first time, clarinet on top the second time? Then you get to reuse the material, but you're using it differently. That is That's the kind of thing I think Mahler was about in his repetition of some of the themes in his symphony. I'm going to repeat this material, but I'm going to orchestrate it differently. And that's what this is. This is the same material, but orchestrating it differently, right? So there you go. Now, one thing that we're also noticing, and Colleen had mentioned about the plotting sound on beat 1, that's the chord symbol playback. So probably you don't want these chord symbols playing back. So I'm going to turn that off. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to right-click one, say select, similar, and now come over to the properties panel and turn off playback. I can turn off playback for chord symbols globally here on the play toolbar, the same way I turned off play repeats. I can turn off play chord symbols, but that turns it off completely. And I don't want to turn it off completely. I just want to turn it off for this score. So this will sound a little better when we start playing some more of it now. So all right, so yeah, so that all is really nice. And the thing that I'm wondering about that chromatic line, again, simple little change here to consider. But what if the second time this whole passage was up an octave? I'm going to take it from here to here, up an octave, and listen to that now. All right, so that's maybe a bit much because the ascending part especially was maybe a bit much because the choir is busy singing there. But maybe on the descending part, it could work up there, but it's drowning them out a little bit. So it is the clarinet is drowning the choir out a little bit there, and you'd have to mark it piano, and then you're like giving them these high notes and then saying, oh yeah, but play them quietly. Maybe not worth it, but it was worth a shot. So let's talk about the balance. So one thing that happens here in the balance, it looks like you're using the basic sound font instead of Muse Sounds, which is good because Muse Sounds choir is quite quiet. But it also looks like you've got the volume turned way down for the choir and turned way up for the clarinet. I currently have my sliders turned off to save space, but I'll turn the sliders back on so we can see. You've got the sliders for the choir turned way down and the clarinet turned way up. So balance-wise, it is funny. It is definitely funny. I think the choir is not loud enough. And so I'm just going to reset all of these things. I'm going to double click them to their defaults. And if we think then the balance isn't good, then, and it could be that the Muse Sounds piano and clarinet do need a boost to be heard above the choir of Muse Score Basic, but I feel like that was too much. Yeah, so I agree with the fact that you did want to turn the clarinet up, but I think that was too much. And I agree with the piano being turned down, and maybe that was about right. Let's hear this again. I'm going to keep listening. Yeah, anyhow, you can play with that some more. I see why you turned it up as much as you did, but to me, it was too much. And maybe the amount you turned the clarinet up was good, and you just turned the choir down too far. But the choir was sort of becoming a little inaudible to me. All right. So those are some things that I'm noticing here. But let's keep going here and check out some more stuff. So one thing also I feel like I should mention because it's come up before, and I had made this observation before, and I'm pretty sure it was you, Graham, that I talked about minor sixth chords. Oh, and Dave, yes, you're absolutely right that panning can make a difference, subjectively speaking. If I take the choir and put the women off to one side and pan the men off to the other, that kind of thing can work. So if you're finding that the balance was better, then you can certainly, I would say that whatever balance you had in MuseScore 3, you will need to redo in MuseScore 4 if you're going to use Muse sounds. But if you don't want to take the time to rebalance things, well, then just make sure you pick MS Basic for all your sounds, and then the sound will be identical. There's no difference whatsoever to the underlying playback engine there. So if I tell it to use MS Basic for everything else, then the same, whatever adjustments you made in MuseScore 3 will also work in MuseScore 4. It just won't be nearly, that clarinet is beautiful in Muse sounds. The MS Basic, the MuseScore 3 clarinet is harsh. So balance-wise, maybe this is closer to what you're expecting, if that's what you're accustomed to. And so you would just have to play with the balance controls here in MuseScore 4 to reproduce that same type of sound. But the Muse Sounds clarinet is pretty amazing. The bass clarinet is like, oh my God, amazing. But one of the things you're going to discover is they have a wider range than most sound fonts, a wider dynamic range. So most sound fonts, the difference between piano and forte is only like a little bit. Muse Sounds, it's really a forte versus a piano. And but most sound fonts have a much more restricted dynamic range. And so it's easy to get accustomed to that and then to be a little sloppy in one's writing, stuff that really won't work in real life because the balances just won't work given the way the instruments are designed. And so it's easy to write stuff that's going to sound decently balanced because basically everything's all the same volume anyhow in a sound font. And that includes MuseScore 3. With Muse Sounds, you're going to get a more realistic range of dynamics between piano and forte, but it does mean you're going to have to be more careful with how you write your dynamics and more careful with things like this G sharp is inherently a very low note on the clarinet, or that I'm back in concert pitch, but whatever. All of these, that F sharp, all of these low notes are inherently quiet on the clarinet. That middle range, that G, something's up with the key signature. It's not changing when I'm updating this. I'm not sure what that's about. That might be something that went wrong in the translation. Not really sure. Yeah, something's up with that, and I'm not sure what. And also, this thing has become stuck on my keyboard, on my screen for some reason. I'm just gonna have to live with it. These low notes don't sing. This middle range notes are not going to project as much as those upper notes, which is one reason why I was playing around with octaves before I was even thinking about dynamics, because you can try to play inherently softer notes louder by putting a louder dynamic on them, but it's not going to have the right, it's like, it doesn't have exactly the right kind of sound to how someone would actually be playing this music. If they wanted to project more, they wouldn't just play low notes louder. They would actually go up the octave. That's how an actual player, who's improvising this kind of stuff or, arranging this with a nod to how it's typically done would be doing that. So panning. So the thing is, the panning isn't going to be very convincing over the internet, because what happens with the sound is there's the projection that happens online. If you're not listening for headphones, you're not going to hear it at all, right? If you're only listening through computer speakers, those computer speakers are, 8 inches apart at most, and you're not going to hear the effect of the panning. But let's do this. I'm going to pan the women all the way to the left, the men all the way to the right. That is like an extreme form of panning. If I now play those two staves, I am now hearing only the women in my left ear, only the men in my right ear, but I don't think you're going to hear it any differently on most of your computer speakers. In your headphones, you will. So, but yeah, that's the thing. So it's that pan knob there. You can either use the knob or use the numeric controls. So, so in the mixer, yeah, you just use that pan to set it all the way to the left. So yeah, that's the deal. So I've got it right now set where the women are all the way panned to the left, the men are panned all the way to the right. Yep. So, and yeah, I don't know what the heck is going on with that. At some point when I tried selecting sound fonts, it decided to just freeze and show me, like, it's now continuing to show me the that pop-up window. So my screen has decided to lock up somehow here, which is quite annoying. But I'm going to not worry about it and move on. So let's keep talking about this a little bit more. Oh, the thing that I was going to start to talk about here, and then I got sidetracked a little bit, was about this these minor sixth chords. So the minor sixth chords, I love the sound of a minor sixth chord. But Graham, I had earlier pointed out to you about something about 2 5s not being the place for them, right? So I was mentioning that in, say, the key of B flat, I wouldn't be, or let's go with the key of F. In the key of F, if I wanted to have a 2, 5, 1, I'm getting to harmony now. If I wanted to go 2, 5, 1, I typically wouldn't voice my 2 chord as a minor sixth chord with the E natural, because now I have basically the sound of the C7. It's like I got to the C7 too soon. G minor 6 is like C7 but with a different bass note. So if I play G minor 7, then C7, you get to hear which is a super important resolution that differentiates the 2 from the 5 and then going to the 1. So in the context of a 2-5-1, that is why we don't use minor sixth chords. But in the context of minor key songs, the 1 chord as a minor sixth chord is beautiful. The 4 chord as a minor sixth chord is beautiful. So even in the key of F, if I ever was going to have a 4 chord and then a minor 4 chord, I very often put the 6th there. So the 6th is a beautiful sound on minor chords, but it goes more with 1 chords and 4 chords than it does with 2 chords, because otherwise you miss that resolution there. So I'm loving your minor sixth chords. Nomenclature wise, you don't put a sharp 6 there. You just call it G minor 6. G minor 6, all interval numbers in chord symbols refer to major intervals or perfect intervals. They never refer to minor intervals. Doesn't matter if the chord is major or minor. Sixth, the number 6 in a chord symbol always means major sixth above the root. Whether it's a major chord, minor chord, or half diminished chord, or any other chord, 6 in a chord symbol means major sixth above the root. So G minor sixth is already this guy here. And yeah, Graham, so absolutely, you're absolutely right that the low range has this poignancy, but yeah, I'm still like kind of riffing on your idea of politeness and what it takes to break out of the politeness, and that means getting out of that range a little bit. But also when you're talking about balance, you do have to think about things like that. So it could be the case that you just need to write a louder dynamic marking to get it to be heard. But the other thing to realize is that if this piece is actually performed, the clarinet player is probably going to be standing out in front of the choir, perhaps even microphoned. might, and the choir might not be. So there's all sorts of things that have to do with the presentation of the music that will allow a quieter line that's inherently quieter to still be heard. But when you're using MuseScore playback, you're going to have to figure out, well, I'm going to tweak that in the mixer, raise the level of it, or whatever. So yeah, those are all things you get to think about. So let's keep going here. But I now that I'm talking about harmony, I definitely am going to kind of morph into talking a little bit about the harmony course. So this little notion here, as I said, is really classic motion. That walking up line to get to the 4, and that chromatic descending line to get down to that 3rd of that 4 chord. Yeah, so that's just really nice. And this stuff going on here in the clarinet, right? All that that is really effective in terms of the amount of space that it takes up, right? That stream of eighth notes is very effective. And the fact that it's sort of ascending, right? The fact that each phrase goes up a step, it's very effective in building some form of tension there. What I will say is, again, you can do more. You can totally do more. That thing is just like, it's on my whole Linux system is now just decided that little pop-up window is just visible, and I can't make it not be. That's a shame. Could probably close MuseScore and reopen it, but not worth it. So anyhow, this line is effective. However, it definitely comes across as classical in that it's very planned. It's very by the book. It's very structured. We're going to have this line. We're going to play that exact line up a step. We'll play that exact line again up another step, and an exact line again up another step. There's a sense in which, that's how Mozart would have written a clarinet concerto or whatever, but it's maybe a klezmer player would probably be finding more interesting things to be doing there. So it could be something like, so again, I want to make sure I'm in concert pitch. I am. Okay, good. Where I'm making my line snake around more. It's not linear like that. It's not a linear scale, linear scale, linear scale, linear scale. That, again, really effective, the way that linear scale climbs the ladder like that, right? Each measure a step higher. But there's a sense in which it's more square. It's more a boxy thing. Classical, when we talk about classical in music, you think about classical architecture and pillars and rectangular buildings and so forth. There's a structure to what it means for something to be classical that applies to music and architecture and other things. And then there's the romantic sensibility, which is more loosey-goosey, right? And that is something that I think this passage would benefit for, so that if you wrote that line in a less classical way, a more looser way that had more dips and ups and downs and a little more unpredictability to the line, it would again address that thing there, right? So yeah, so it's all really good stuff, and I love how at that one spot here you have the kind of accompaniment pull out. We didn't really get to it. There's another thing going on here where I think I need to make sure that I have my sample rate set to 44.1. Yeah, that'll help also. We didn't get to hear this in its full glory before because of the chord symbol playback, but the piano drops out for that passage, and we didn't really hear that, so we're going to hear it now. Piano's now gone, right? Piano's gone still. And then the piano comes back in, and the clarinet. So at that point, the piano comes back in, and the clarinet stops doubling the melody. So we've got kind of a good double whammy going on there, right? Of the two interesting things happening at once there in measure 59, where the piano re-enters and the clarinet starts providing more of an obligato counter melody rather than just duplicating the melody. So it's really effective use of dropping out of the accompaniment and then bringing it back in a more interesting way. So I think that, and you can't be too fancy with the clarinet part there, because again, you don't want to drown out or confuse the singers. And so I think you found the right balance there of giving the clarinet something to do that's unique and different, but not, I think you're walking that tightrope well. It's unique and different from what the choir is doing and not too distracting either. Dave, as to the piano roll, the work that's being done on providing new and improved playback tweaking features is going to kind of happen gradually. So with MuseScore 4.2 later this year, we're going to see some new features, and 4.3 will then happen with more. But as far as anything as full as what the piano roll used to be able to do, a new and improved version of that is probably MuseScore 5. Which, every once in a while they toss around the idea of MuseScore 5, there being a whole another major version of MuseScore, but it's not going to be a tremendously different thing. Like from MuseScore 3 to 4 feels very different. MuseScore 4 to 5 won't feel as big a difference, but the reason it's going to be a new version number is it's going to require some changes under the hood. So to think about what a piano roll editor does for people that don't know, it lets you take notes and, as if it was a piano roll, just change the length of the note, not having to do with notation, but say, hey, I want this one to be, 17 milliseconds longer or whatever, not thinking about, oh, I want it to be dotted or something, but not having to do with notation, but just physically manipulating the length of each note and the loudness of each note numerically and so forth. So the piano roll feature in MuseScore 3 was very, very limited by its tie to notation. You couldn't make notes into triplets. You couldn't take a grace note and move it from before the bar, move it from after the bar line to before the bar line, all sorts of things that you really couldn't do that they want to change things under the hood to make the piano roll editor to be much, much more powerful, but it's requiring some fairly significant changes under the hood. So that's why the new and improved piano roll editor is still going to be a ways off. It's going to be more like a MuseScore 5 thing. There we go. So Elliot, I see that you mentioned some places where you posted things, but by all means, post it to the community. I will see it in the community. If you post it to the support forum on musescore.org, that's great too, and maybe someone's going to help. But my guess is if you just do what I said, revert to factory settings, that's probably it right there. That's probably all you need. But okay, so let me so Graham, yeah, really nice job on all of this, and let me know if you've got any other specific questions. So yeah, a piano roll literally is like, think about a player piano. It's a piece of paper with these lines, these holes cut in the paper, and the position of those holes determines when the note starts and stops. So a piano roll editor lets you basically edit things graphically in a way that kind of looks like that. So you're editing the length of the note graphically rather than thinking of notation. That's the idea of that is the idea of a piano roll editor. So all right, so let me talk a little bit more about this piece from a harmony perspective and give you some ideas about some of the kinds of things that we're gonna be talking about in the harmony course to kind of whet your appetite for that. So this piece is in a minor key and it stays minor. You know, in this week's theory thing in my newsletter, I talked about that idea of modulating between relative major and relative minor, and this piece doesn't really do that. It doesn't really have a section that is in a major key. I mean, it hits the major chord right here. Whoops. That's the major. That's the relative major. But then immediately, right? So it only went to relative major for 2 measures. So that's that kind of thing where you just happen to have a 2-5-1 going to the relative major. That's a thing. So all this language I'm giving, though, about like 2-5-1s going to relative major and relative minor, and whether you're modulating or just going there temporarily, this is all the kind of stuff that we talk about. So this piece, if I talk about it from the perspective of what's happening, we have minor key 1, 1 to the 5 to 1, and then we have what's called a secondary dominant, this G7 moving to the 4 chord. G7 doesn't belong in the key of of G minor because it's got a B natural, but it belongs in the key of C minor. And that's where it's leading to, right? Going to C minor. So that B natural is the leading tone in C minor. So the way this chord progression works is very much about that. Now, also, as far as that goes, there's something that I will call a probably misspelling of the chord symbol here, Graham, so you might want to look at this also. In this passage here, right, this passage here, that is a G minor chord. This is not an F sharp minor chord. If it was an F sharp minor chord, it would have a C sharp. It's an F sharp diminished chord. And that's significant because we might ask, well, why is that chord there? And the answer is F sharp diminished comes to G. In the same way that G goes to C minor, that B likes to go to C, and we get the 5 to 1, 5 to 1 in C minor. This is 7 to 1 in the key of G. So we're getting to use this idea of how chords lead to each other, to tonicize, to take this diminished chord is tonicizing that G chord. This G chord is tonicizing that C minor chord. This is all the kind of language we're going to be learning. So anyhow, that's a diminished chord, not a minor chord. And then we're in C minor. We've moved to C minor, and we didn't like really change keys, but we kind of live in C minor for a little bit. Now we have a G7 going to C minor, and then this diminished chord here going to A, and this diminished chord here I would also claim is maybe not exactly a diminished chord, this G diminished. I would need to see the original sheet music to see how it's set up, but your voicing is something different. So what's happening here in you have a C natural in the altos here against the C sharp coming here in the piano part and the C sharp in the clarinet. And I'm not saying half step clashes can never be good, but you also have a C in the bass, right? This is a C minor chord that's actually voiced in your voices. And so it's not really, you also have that E flat right here in the tenor, and that's conflicting with the E natural. So there's something going on here with the voicing of what you have in the choir part isn't matching your diminished chord there. And so I think that's not really supposed to be a diminished chord. I'm not saying that the C minor is the right sound either. There's probably a different sound that we could put in there. And that's the kind of thing we will explore in the harmony course. Well, let's say it's a blank slate and I get to choose what chord I want. Then it's the A chord. So let's say I want it to change. If I want to think, well, what chord could I put under that G? I'm going to look at, well, where's it going? It's going to A. So maybe I think about like giving that A, tonicizing that A, or doing something to set up that A. Circle of fifths is always good. So it kind of makes me want to try an E half diminished chord, which is very similar to the G diminished chord that you wrote, just a little different. So I want to check that. I feel like bringing in that E natural is actually a little too soon, because I feel like we want to wait on that A chord to hear the E natural. It's this big brightening of the sound. We bring in the C sharp, we bring in the E natural. And by the way, you don't have the E natural notated here. Your alto is an E flat, your piano is an E flat also. And that's an okay chord. That's a fine chord. It's an A chord with a flat 5. That's a good jazz chord there. That's also a klezmer chord. So that could be totally legit. But I'd want to make sure that you meant to do that also. But that's also part of why the E natural felt wrong, because now I'm going from brighter to darker, and I wanted it to get brighter on the A chord. So this thinking of chords in terms of brightness and darkness and what's coming from minor and what's coming from major, and what all of those sorts of things, they're all the kinds of things that we dig into a lot deeper in the context of things like the harmony course. So yeah, that's all some really good stuff there. You've got a really nice use of this pedal point here. I'm going to play that, where you are holding on to the G while doing other things harmonically. And that's probably also in the original, although I don't remember for sure. That G is... holding on to that G while the chord keeps going back between 1 and 5, 1 and 5, 1 and 5, right? That's absolutely a thing. And whether or not it was part of the original music or whether that was your contribution to it, I can't remember. It's been a while since I saw the show. But it's really effective, and that sort of pedal point goes way back. Again, it's like a big, Bach device pedal point, literally coming from organ pedals. So that idea of holding on to a bass note while doing some harmonic motion, it creates a certain type of tension, and it's another technique we learned about in the harmony course. So yeah, I'm happy to see that in there as well. So yeah, it's all good stuff that we're talking about here. All things that we can dig into more harmonically in that course. The concepts that I've been talking about today, but also just the arrangement concepts we talked about today are just good things to know about. Ranges and when you can get away with being busy. And if you want to listen, I'm just going to give you one last thought about that idea of like the clarinet being more active when the singers aren't. Listen to the arrangements that were done for, Frank Sinatra and people of that ilk, right? That Great American Songbook, all those sort of arrangements of singers singing out in front of a big band and or orchestra, and listen to the way those were orchestrated and the way behind when the vocal is doing things, there's less going on, and then when the vocal is either resting or sustaining a note, there's more going on. You'll definitely learn a lot by paying attention to that sort of thing in that kind of music, because that's where a lot of these skills of arranging really kind of came to full flower, and that is the musical tradition, the musical theater tradition, basically, because that's where those songs came from. A lot of them was musical theater or movies. That is absolutely the tradition that this song lives within as well. All right, so there you go. So I'm gonna call this good here, and we're just gonna play out some music here. And I want to thank everyone for being here. Thanks for your comments and questions and so forth in there. And again, Elliot, if you're still having any issues, I'm not sure. I haven't been able to totally follow the chat to know if there's still continuing issues there, but definitely post in the discussion area, and I'll take a look. And so next week, This time we'll be talking a lot about harmony, and I'll really talk more details about the harmony course, give you more idea what to expect about it, and then we're going to get underway the week after that. That's the plan. So you heard it here first. And thanks again, everyone, for being here, and have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.